After the starkness of winter, spring is the time when we really look forward to colour returning to our lives, and none more so than just the simple colour of green. And the whole carpet of green you can see here are the newly emerging spring bulbs that are going to come back and bring colour in a few weeks' time. We've already had one carpet of colour run through this border in the form of crocuses, which turn the whole area mauve. And now we're in a bit of a lull where things have just receded a bit and gone green, and then in a couple of weeks' time that colour will return with the blue bluebells. But really there's an opportunity even here to introduce some more colour into the border, and it's really important that you go round the garden and assess the amount of colour that there is at different, even just different weeks, from week to week, how that colour changes. We've got little pops of colour though. We've got these lovely pushkinias just planted down here, which are a very subtle pale blue, which are really brightening your heart when you look at them. But we could introduce a lot more colour in these weeks between the end of that crocus fanfare and the finale of the bluebells, before everything else starts to come into leaf. So this is an area where we could possibly add even more spring colour. Now when it comes to your walk around the garden and assessing your spring colour, you may come to areas where you think that it's pretty well served for spring colour. These lovely shrubs here, this beautiful daphne and the cornus mass here, really adding some useful colour. But underneath, you probably might find that in the shade underneath that there are some gaps in your colour, and let's face it, you want as much colour in the spring as possible. So here's a prime area where you might add to the amount of hellebores that you plant through here. You might add some more spring bulbs and also some spring flowering perennials. Things like pulmonarias would do really well in these semi-shady and slightly drier conditions underneath these shrubs. So think outside the box. Look at the big shrubs and think where you can plant underneath them. Now in some parts of the garden you may have larger shrubs and bushes that lose their leaves in the winter, and that sort of emulates what happens in nature. You get a layer of different vegetation within a woodland, and then the understory, the plants that are growing on the ground underneath, really are the things that are trying to get their life cycle out of the way before all the foliage develops above them and shades them out for the summer. But without those leaves on the shrubs in front, you can actually see straight into this area during the spring, and that means that it can be quite dull and uninteresting. So here is a prime area where we might be able to introduce some more spring bulbs. We might be able to plant some spring flowering perennials in here as well, and even some small shrubs that will recreate that feeling of a glimpse into a woodland garden in the middle of the spring, just before everything else comes into foliage and shades out the plants underneath. So this is a really good planting opportunity in this area. So by going around the garden, assessing the areas that could do with a little bit more colour injecting in them, and also doing a bit of instant planting, to be honest, because you can buy bulbs and perennials that are in flower at this time of year that you can plant straight into the garden, and you can solve the problems in your garden where there's a lack of colour immediately, and then you'll have that colour for years to come.